All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you here for the ClearEdge Marketing Google Hangout and live discussion around the pain points and challenges facing today's staffing leaders and how to overcome them. I'm Leslie Vickrey, CEO and founder of ClearEdge Marketing, and I'm joined today by three industry leaders who I'm pretty confident most of you have met over the years, but we have with us strategic consultant Tom Nunn, we have EVP of MDI Group Pam Gates, and of course the founder and CEO of Inavero, Gregg, who I think of all of us on the Google Hangout today probably has the best background. So thank you, Eric, for having the pictures and so forth. That's fantastic. So anyway, just real quickly, a bit of housekeeping details to get us started. If this is your first Google Hangout, you may notice some video lag time. Typically, that's associated with a slower or shared connection. I know on our end, as the panelists and presenters, we're doing our best to keep the connection strong so you can hear us clearly. But unfortunately, as we all know with technology, some things are simply out of our control. So thank you for your patience today. We are live streaming this on Twitter, and if anyone feels like live tweeting during the Hangout, you can use the hashtag CE Insights. Again, that's C as in ClearEdge, CE Insights. So feel free to live tweet. We'll also have a live recording made available, so we'll be sure to send that out after the Hangout that you can share with your teams as well. So the Hangout is meant to be an interactive panel discussion and an opportunity for all of you to submit questions. So please feel free throughout the conversation to submit questions, and we'll be sure to weave those in as time permits throughout our discussion. And we have about an hour for today's discussion, and we'll be focusing on three key topics, and that's pain points in the staffing industry, candidate sourcing, and investing, so what companies are investing in. So we'll go ahead without further ado and get started. So for quick background, ClearEdge recently launched a study called No Pain, No Gain, a pulse check on staffing executives' pain points. So today's discussion will zoom in on those key findings, of which 55 staffing executives, including many of you who are living out today, participated in. So if you don't have a copy of the report, we'll be happy to provide you one after the Hangout, or you can go to our website to download it as well. So with that, I'd like to start out by having each of our panelists take a minute to briefly introduce themselves. So Tom Nunn, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Good morning, everybody. Tom Nunn here. A little bit on my background. I started out in the staffing industry kind of late in my career in 2000. Here in the greater Boston area, worked for a pretty large company that we grew. I left in 2009 and started my consulting company. And in the ensuing 6.5 years, I've worked with about 55 different staffing companies around the country, primarily companies in the $5 to $100 million range.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Tom. Eric?
Yeah, my name's Gregg. I'm CEO and founder of Inavero, and I have been in the staffing industry, focused on this space for almost a decade now. We do the Opportunities in Staffing study, which is a industry-wide study that we do with Career Builder each year, and you also may know us from our Best of Staffing competition, where we highlight the top staffing firms in the industry based on their client satisfaction and the satisfaction of the talent that they place.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And Pam?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Pam Gates, and I've been in the staffing industry for nearly 20 years. That's hard to believe. Primarily focused on the information technology space. I'm right now with MDI Group, and I manage their Western region. We also focus exclusively on the IT space, primarily contingent labor, staff augmentation.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So our first topic today is pain points, and not too surprising, sourcing candidates was identified as the point by 33% of the survey topics, or the survey takers. So Tom, I'm going to start with you. You work with a lot of staffing companies as part of the facilitated roundtables that you run, and also, in your past life running companies as well in the staffing industry. Are there any interesting approaches that you've seen companies take to source candidates in response to the market?
And are we talking about sourcing consultants or
Correct.
sourcing? Okay.
Yep.
Well, one of the trends that I've noticed over the years is a lot more of the recruiters in staffing companies immediately go to job boards, and job boards are obviously very, very important. But I think particularly for relationship-based recruiting to service your relationship-based customers, looking at your internal database and using your internal database is somewhat of a lost art. So one of the things that I like to work on is asking or suggesting that companies go in and really take advantage of all the candidates that are in their database. I know one of my customers uses the term, let's reboot candidates in the database, let's re-engage. There are obviously a lot of consultants that make themselves available out on the job boards, and those are very, very important. But I also think that there's a pretty good population of consultants that aren't usually on the job boards, and they prefer to work with selected number of recruiters. And I think that if you can develop relationships and keep in touch with folks, know if they're not working for you, they're working for the competition. Mark in the database when they're becoming available and be talking to them, before they're ready for their new assignment. So that's one trend that I'd like to see people going back to is utilizing the internal database.
Okay, that's a really good point. I moderated a roundtable for the TechServe conference, and I asked all four of the panelists which source they go to first, and I was surprised that all four use their company database first. I think you're right. It's a trend going in that direction, something that we're seeing change. So that's a really good point. So Eric, moving over to you. According to the annual Inavero and Career Builder Opportunities and Staffing report, there's really a goal line for candidates that isn't being leveraged. So the survey results indicate that only 1 in 4 candidates are actually rehired or placed again within 30 days of their last assignment. So it seems like they're leaving a huge pool of placed candidates that are largely untapped. So it's an opportunity to source, and so based on that information, what do you see that firms are doing a better job now than before to rehire? So perhaps you can share some specific examples or stories.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is that people are really looking at that as one of the key metrics. Tom had a great point in the sense that we have people going off assignments all the time that would be great resources to put back on. We know more about them. We know that their work ethic. We know that we can trust them. And yet, in most cases, we're losing those people right out the back door on it. And so it's a challenge that we have on that I think is something that people are paying more attention to. The other thing and candidly, it's not a magic silver bullet that people are using. They're just getting out in front of that. That same study that we did found that about half of consultants, when we tell them that their assignment's going to last 6 months, about half of them don't believe that. And 1 in 4 actually start looking for their next assignment the same day they start their initial assignment. And so we just have to get a little bit more proactive on how we engage with our consultants while they're on an assignment, and specifically at the end of the assignment, so that we're not going blind out to look for the next candidate. We're leveraging the candidate that we already vetted, that we already went through the process with, and that we know can deliver value for our clients.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks, Eric. Pam, I'm going to move this over to you for a minute here. Some people are actually saying it's a candidate, and that the candidates often have 3 to 5 offers at any given time. And part of the challenge that we heard from write-in comments in the study is that clients, it's really having to educate clients on the market, and that they're taking a really long time to move forward with offers. So they don't even realize in some cases, and they think, well, yes, I love your candidate, but maybe I can get a better rate. And we know that that's not typically the case. So what advice do you have for educating clients on today's market and trying to avoid losing candidates to another offer and or competitor?
I think timing is really important. That's certainly the case, but communicating what that timing looks like from an internal perspective within their company. So really understanding what initiatives or what decisions have to take place before they can move forward to make an offer. So that communication back to the staffing agencies and therefore onto the candidate really helps them understand, okay, this is what the timeline looks like for this particular opportunity. That way they can weigh that out. In addition to that, really understanding that it's a candidate market, really knowing that they do have 3 to 5 offers at any one time, and that clients will continue to come back and throw more money at them or throw more flexibility at them or offer a work from home option. So just understanding what the different options are out there.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. So in addition to the candidate pain point, the sourcing pain point, we've also identified penetrating existing accounts as an issue. So, Tom, I'm going to turn this over to you. Many executives feel like their sales teams prefer to hunt and get a placement or 2 or 3 and then move on to the next deal. We do hear this over and over again in companies, and a lot of firms simply aren't taking action to fix that issue. They just let it kind of keep happening, and many accounts just sitting on the table. So it seems like there's a really large opportunity for growth if they focus on expanding existing accounts where appropriate. So what are you seeing the companies you're working with doing as far as the whole penetrating existing accounts? Are they assigning an account executive or a farmer to work those accounts? Any tips or advice that you have for the audience today?
Well, I think it's absolutely a trend, something that's been happening for years. You know, if you looked at all of your billing consultants and you threw aside your top 1 or 2 customers, the average billing headcount and all the rest of your clients probably hovers in the 2 to 2.5 billing headcount, and that's not very good. So some of the things that I've seen work are rewards. That if you can get an account to let's say 5 billing headcount or 10 billing headcount to throw out bonuses, that's a positive reinforcement. I've also seen. And you could either call this negative or perhaps smart on the company's part, where a very large account where there are multiple different divisions. I've seen the logical alternative is to break up an account and put 2 or 3 account execs on it. And that can work if it's pretty discrete around divisions or locations. I've seen and helped companies put goals in place on an annual basis that would be we've only got 1 account that's over 20 billing headcount. Let's put goals in place that we want 3 over 10. We want 5 over 8. So an X by Y type of set of goals, and put rewards around that, from bonus to bonus incentives just to bulk it up. Those are some of the things that some of the trends that I like and that I'm seeing and try to ask or suggest that people put in place.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And I'm sure people would have a lot of questions for you around compensation for those accounts when they are putting multiple people on that. So we'll use that as a follow-up. If anyone has questions for you, they can reach out to you directly and ask that, because I know it seems to be a significant issue and challenge that if overcome, and I like the idea of putting in place the different goals as far as how many, looking at the accounts and how many you think you can get over and putting in a plan for that. I think that's great.
I might add one other thing that I
Sure.
neglected to mention, and that would be put a very simple strategic account planning process in place. Don't over-engineer it, but ask your account reps, come to me as a sales manager, and I want to know very strategic things about a client. What is their annual spend on IT contingent staffing? What % do we have? What does the organization chart look like? How many hiring managers have you met? How many have you not met? What are the typical skill sets? And then really just begin to push on that. Well, if there's 50 hiring managers and you only met 3, then set goals around meet 5 more next month. So a very simple strategic account planning process, and hold account reps accountable for continuing to make progress along those lines.
That's great, thank you. So, Eric, I'm going to move on to you now. Many people surveyed said they could grow significantly if they could just find more sales executives and recruiters. So often what we find is that they're reactive in the search versus proactively building a warm pipeline. So for example, let's say a sales rep unexpectedly leaves. they don't really have anyone to turn to who they've been talking to or vetting over time to support turnover, but also to support growth. So when they're ready to hire, they have someone there. So it seems like internal hiring presents a huge market opportunity for staffing firms to really gain market share and differentiate. What do you think are the top drivers, I guess, for hiring good sales and recruiting professionals? What are you seeing firms do?
Yeah, so you hit a huge issue, and we see it in our survey results all the time for clients that we're working with, where some of the biggest issues will be when they have turnover, and it's really hard to convince a client that unexpected or unwanted or even good turnover is a positive thing for them. And so as you look at that, you have a real challenge of two things. First of all, hopefully trying to prevent turnover. And when that, what we found in our study was that some of the biggest things to do there is to really encourage the team atmosphere. People are actually more loyal to their coworkers than they are to their manager or to the organization. And so making sure that you're doing that and encouraging and fostering that environment, making sure that you're helping people see a little bit of a path in their own careers is an important piece. But then when you do have that turnover, and you're looking to hire those next individuals, a couple things to keep in mind. The first of which is that retention is directly linked to the satisfaction of your clients and your talent that you place. And so if you buy into that, and we've got data that supports that, then the next thing that you need to know is that empathy is one of the biggest traits that you really need to be hiring for. When we look across organizations, big organizations, they'll have some branches that are performing at a world-class level. The experience of consultants and the experience of clients that work with that branch is truly world-class, Nordstrom's kind of service. And then in the very same organization, with the same training, the same challenges, the same issues evolved, you'll have another branch that might be down, at an average for the industry, or maybe even a below average for the industry. And when you look at that, a big part of that is just who really is driven by creating those relationships and cementing those relationships. And then the last thing that I'll say is that you really want to make sure that you don't leave yourself susceptible to where you have an account manager or a number of account managers that kind of have you over the barrel because they're the only ones that have the relationship with with your key accounts or with some of your key talent, and so you want to make sure that you're continually almost succession planning even at that level. And the firms that do that well end up not creating the headwind that others do with the unwanted turnover.
Yeah, I love that succession planning idea. I mean, Pam, looking at you managing a region, what have you seen work well as far as being able to do, building a warm pipeline or succession planning from a local market perspective? So when you're looking to source, hire, and retain key sales execs or recruiters, what advice do you have, knowing that you're kind of in the trenches and seeing this every day?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is just being active in your market. So being visible, not only from a social perspective, but also in person. So taking those opportunities to network with your peers, network with all the talent that you feel like, might be not only interested in the opportunities, but would be really good at the opportunities. And that can be salespeople from other disciplines as well. So just really getting to know different people and then continuing to follow up. It's never, I think some people have a misconception around, well, I'm going to go have lunch or have a coffee with someone and then I'm going to, invite them to interview and it's going to work out great. There have been people that I have spoken to year after year after year and have just really cemented relationships that have eventually turned into great employees for me. So I think it's being visible and it's also building relationships.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a quick reminder to everyone, I do see one question submitted, but feel free, everyone, to submit questions throughout that we can answer. So we have a question here. We'll go ahead and weave in. This is from Bala, and Bala had said, besides sourcing, can you suggest any creative ways on how to qualify candidates for a job? I'm not sure, do you, Pam, just being in the local market, do you want to go ahead and answer that? Again, it's besides sourcing, can you suggest any creative ways on how to qualify a candidate for a job?
Well, when you're, I guess I'm misunderstanding the question. Is it sourcing candidates, or once you've identified a candidate, confirming that they have the talent that's on their resume?
Yeah, so how do you qualify them, I guess, would be a way to put that. So aside, you've sourced them and they're there, how are you qualifying them? What are the best or creative ways you can do that?
Certainly, I think there are a couple different ways. First of all, you've got their resume that you're going through and really digging into and trying to understand the projects, understand the technology that they've utilized. And I think the more that a candidate talks, the more you're going to understand really how deep their knowledge is. There are several testing tools out there that can really also validate potentially what their skill level is within a certain area. There are so many skills that overlap nowadays. So when you look at especially a technology resume, I mean, you might have 20, 30 different technologies under one job, and to really just understand, how much did you use that? Where do you feel like you rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? How long have you used it? So really to understand their depth there. I really find every once in a while we do run into candidates that maybe we'll go interview and hey, that's not what they're represented on the resume. But for the most part, the candidate is also trying to represent themselves as best as possible. I think often we just find that we need to help them tweak their resume to ensure that it is accurate and can be displayed of the talent that they have. So.
Okay, thank you. And Bala, if there was anything in that question when we read it that you'd like to clarify, please feel free to do so. So thank you, Pam. Tom, I'm going to turn the next question over to you, and we're going to switch topics to candidate sourcing. So there are so many tools available today for sourcing candidates. How do companies evaluate the ROI on their candidate sources? So what best practices are you seeing basically to track the hires to the actual source and then use that data to evaluate tools and annual investments?
Well, I just did a survey across my customer base, so got about 22 different responses, and it was a job board survey, and which is obviously a very important source of talent. And it's what is your annual spend in total on job boards? What is your revenue for the year, and how many recruiters do you have? So it ranged from a low of maybe $4,000 per recruiter to a high of about $14,000 per recruiter, and an average of about $8,000 per recruiter. And we didn't get pricing what they're paying for individual job boards. That wouldn't be really appropriate. It was more your total spend. And it wasn't necessarily tightly correlated with the size of your company. So, and this was across my roundtables, and I've talked with all of them on the results, and some CEOs were very surprised. Wow, I'm spending way too much. Others were, wow, maybe I'm not spending enough. One of the obvious ways to gauge how well you're using the tool versus what you're spending is to track when you put candidates in your database, or even more importantly, when you put them to work, what was the source? Was it one of the job boards? Was it your internal database? Mm-hmm. And to begin to really use that data to analyze, if I'm paying X amount of dollars for LinkedIn or Career Builder or Monster, how many starts am I getting from that? So really just pay attention to data. Pretty simple data, but you probably wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of companies out there that don't really pay attention to that. And I'm going to turn my phone off.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to call on you later about accountability, because I think a big part of the data, if you get garbage in, you get garbage out. So being able to track, exactly where the source came from, and clearly defining the initial source. If, for example, you found, if you were out, kind of back to your point earlier, and you found someone on Career Builder or a different job board, and they were already in your database, but you didn't go to the database first, making sure that people are appropriately attributing the source is important as well. So I'll get back to you in a little bit on accountability. Eric, through your Best of Staffing initiatives, you get a lot of insights into the minds of the candidates. So what are candidates saying they want from staffing firms and their recruiters?
So we do see a lot of different things come through on that, and there's some real consistency. Actually, regardless of the sector that you're staffing in, there are a handful of things that are really near and dear. For example, we know that satisfaction goes up dramatically if the recruiter can get to know the person as an individual as a part of those early process points. We can't place everybody, but we can have a goal of adding value to everybody that we interact with. And that's another big piece of it. People are hungry for coaching and knowledge early in that process, whether it be resume reviews, whether it be interview prep. All of those things are actually really important to our candidate pool and add value whether or not they end up being placed by us or not. Now, take into that again once somebody's on an assignment and they expect to be treated well. They understand enough about the economics to know that it's good for them and good for you for them to stay on that assignment. And so if they're doing a good job, they want feedback, they want coaching, they want to know that you appreciate them, and ultimately they want you to really represent them as best you can, and especially once they start to earn you money. That's kind of the biggest piece. Where people really get frustrated is when they've gone through an assignment and partway through they either feel abandoned or they come to the end of a successful assignment and nobody talks to them about what the next steps are. And that's a real missed opportunity. Not only does it hurt our rehire rate, but it hurts our reputation in the marketplace, because we may have done a great job through 6 months of an assignment, but if the last thing we leave people with is this impression of us not caring anymore once they're not putting money in our pocket, right, which is how they interpret it, that's a really hard thing to overcome.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, the candidate view of, putting money in your pocket. So people say it's, there's such a lack of talent and candidates out there, but what I'm hearing is there are so many candidates that you staffing firms that you're actually losing because you're not treating them the way that they want to be treated or communicating with them. So it's definitely a big opportunity. I guess, Pam, playing off of Eric's answer and back to the topic of candidates having 3 to 5 offers on the table, why would a candidate choose you or MDI over another firm or opportunity? So what are you finding, and this other staffing firms on the call will relate to that, and what are you finding is most important?
I think one of the big things is just communication. So setting expectations around the communication that you will have with your recruiter, and then doing what you say you're going to do. If, hey, I'm going to follow up with you every week during your job search and really want to get feedback on what's going on with you, and I'll provide feedback to you as well, even if I don't have any feedback. I think that's really important. And I also pulled just a few comments from our Best of Staffing. To be honest, we've got some great comments from our current consultants and past consultants. And one of the reasons, or a few of the reasons they choose MDI is professionalism, integrity, responsiveness, always available, address issues immediately. And MDI treated me more like a family member as opposed to just a worker or somebody I'm billing for their account.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So, Tom, I guess when looking at the survey results and the amount of investment staffing firms are making in tools and technology, you were very helpful and read through the results and gave us some commentary. And one of the areas you mentioned as the biggest challenge is holding people accountable. So whether it's accountability for actually using the tool or entering data into a system, what have you seen work well at companies as far as encouraging adaptation and use of tools and holding people accountable?
Well, great question. I think that if I were to pick one of the top 3 areas that companies when they self-assess where do we really need to improve, it would be our accountability systems. So I like to break that down into a real simple concept. Accountability systems really only involve 2 things. 100% clarity on what's expected of me from my boss. It sounds very simple, but that a lot of times is not in place. And then number 2, positive reinforcements when I'm doing what's expected of me, and implications, be it a gentle nudge all the way to your job's in jeopardy when I'm not meeting my expectations. So, there's an old adage out there: if you put a lot of people to work and your production's great, you can do what you want. I don't necessarily believe in that. I do believe that someone that is a great producer cuts themselves some slack. And when I was in the business, somebody putting $1 million in margin a year onto the books. I could care less what their customer contact activity was. It was pretty obvious that they were doing that. However, there were certain things that I call it the non-negotiables, that just because they were a good producer did not mean that they didn't have to do that. And that would be things like proper documentation in the system, just certain rules that you just were not going to be able to get away with if you didn't follow them. And the easiest thing to do is just look the other way, because sometimes it's hard to have to have a tough conversation. But the smartest thing to do is to have it, be polite, be productive, but call people out. So it sounds so simple on how you can hold people accountable, yet a lot of people don't do a very good job at it.
And it's interesting that you say even if they're performing well. I think oftentimes management's afraid to rock the boat or do anything in that regard. So I like to hear that you believe in holding everyone accountable, which I think is key, and it's an important message to send the company and a team. So Eric, according to your opportunities and staffing report, 91% of candidates will encourage others to use a staffing firm if they have a good experience. So that said, many companies aren't fully promoting and leveraging their own referral programs, which seems like the low-hanging fruit to me. What are some best practices you've seen around companies implementing and promoting referral programs? Are there any new tactics you're seeing companies implement versus the standard referral fee?
Yeah, so I'll hit on a couple of things there. The first of which is that it is remarkable. People, when they have a good experience, and part of this, unfortunately, is just our reputation, and they don't necessarily expect a good experience, but when people have a good experience, that they're anxious to talk about it, and they're willing to talk about it, and MDI is a perfect example of that. You heard the examples of people and what they were saying about that experience, and so the first thing that ultimately you have to do to make sure your referral program is going to work is just be referable, be remarkable, do something exceptional, and do it consistently well, so that people are wanting to tell others about that experience in a positive way. That's table stakes. Now, once you're doing that, the things that we find that people make a mistake on more often than not is not recognizing the social component of that referral. We tend to throw money at it, but that doesn't necessarily really incent people completely to do that. Certainly they like the money on that, but in some ways you actually increase a little bit of a social discomfort there as well. So let's say that I think Tom's great. He should be working for the same staffing firm I am. I say, Tom, I got a great opportunity. You have to work with MDI. They're so great. They're so wonderful. And Tom says, wow, that's great. And MDI is going to give me a $500 referral fee if Tom goes to work there. Well, it puts me in a little bit of an awkward position, right? Do I tell Tom that, hey, and by the way, I'm going to make $500 if you go to work there, thereby bringing into question, do I really love MDI? Or am I just trying to get $500 on the back of Tom's work, right? What we find more successful, and we actually tested this a couple years ago with a survey, what we find more successful is you take that same dollar amount, whatever you decide to be the right amount, $500, $1,000, whatever it might be, and it's different by sector, you split that in half, and now you say, okay, Eric, I'm going to give you $250, but I'm also going to give Tom $250 if we end up placing him. And so now I can go into it and I can say, hey, MDI is great. You really got to go to work for MDI. I love it there. You're going to love it there. And by the way, make sure that you mention that I referred you, because if you end up taking a position with them, we're both going to get an extra $250. Now we can go, watch that Portland Timbers match on MDI's back, right, or whatever it may be. And it removes whatever that barrier is. And that's the thing with referral programs, is that you want to create a sense of urgency, and you want to remove any potential social barriers to having that conversation.
I love that. I like the splitting of the referral fee. That's a great idea. And you're right, it really takes away that uncomfortable feeling of that. So great advice. It reminds me a little bit of your impact talk, Eric, at a TechServe, for anyone who saw that, just about, when you mentioned being referable, just being able to have people tell those stories for you and to be able to tell your story on your behalf, I think is really, really important. So,
well, that's what I love, Leslie, about what Pam was talking about, is that she has those people telling the stories, and she has that information, and that's really persuasive when you're able to do that. Whatever she says about MDI, comes at a huge discount in the marketplace, because of course she's going to talk about how great MDI is, and she should. But if she can leverage the voices of those consultants that have no vested interest in selling somebody on MDI, it's so much more impactful. So I love hearing her talk about that piece of it, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to do more with those stories.
I would agree. All right. Let's move on to our final topic. So we're going to talk about investments now. So 69% of the executives surveyed said applicant tracking systems are their most significant annual investment, followed by job boards at 38%. So 69% ATS, most significant investment, and 38% job boards. So Pam, I'm going to turn this over to you and ask you a quick question here. Are staffing firms getting the most out of their ATS systems? So what are the most important ways you plan to use your ATS in this coming year that's maybe beyond the standard functionality?
Sure. You know, I think everyone really looks to their ATS I mean, it's an applicant tracking system, just like it states. So, but I often think we discount other opportunities and ways to use it. So first, I think, and foremost, is just ensuring that you're able to search it and search it thoroughly, search it well, and make it easy to use for your recruiters. So, you know, knowing there's a strong usability factor there, and being able to track your results, right? You know, are there candidates coming out of our ATS, regardless of where they came from, that we're able to place? And then really secondly, I think you can really look for some of those CRM functionalities within certain ATSs right now that can really help your sales team and help your leadership take opportunities, take conversations that they might be having with clients, and really coach them and work with them on how we're going to get that to a job order. So I think that there's some opportunity there as well that we're trying to take advantage of here at MDI.
I think it's important, too, to proactively, it seems like a lot of the ATSs are launching new products and new tools and, you know, moving really quickly to stay ahead of market, but to constantly ask or have someone responsible internally for owning it and to ask for demos and updates and, you know, just to be aware of all the features and functionality, because we do find, you know, even in marketing, we try to encourage our clients to stay in touch with candidates throughout, you know, after they've been hired and throughout the cycle. And there's a lot of built-in functionality in the ATS that companies are taking advantage of, and oftentimes it's new tools that are being launched that they're not even aware are out there. It's either getting buried in the email or they're having a hard time keeping up with it. So I would also encourage people at least quarterly to, you know, proactively be accountable, as Tom said, but proactively reach out and understand what else they should be or could be doing with that, and lean on the ATS company that you're investing so much in to help you with that.
That's a great point. There are a lot of third-party tools out there that work really well with ATSs that aren't very well known sometimes.
Right, exactly. And I know they're working quickly to integrate, you know, marketing automation tools and so forth in there, so it's important to take a look at that. So Eric, how do you feel? Are staffing firms missing the boat and not putting their money in the right places investment-wise? What are your thoughts?
I think we're starting to see that change a little bit. I think for a while we underinvested in the candidate experience and the applicant experience. And I think that just the nature of this job market, we're seeing more investment there than we've ever seen. We used to, you know, we used to have no problem selling client satisfaction surveys, and then, you know, it was a little harder to get people to care at the same level about their candidates and their consultants, and that's shifted completely. We're a pretty even playing field right now. Matter of fact, the satisfaction's higher on the contractor side than it is on the client side right now, partially because we have some mismanaged expectations in the space, and candidly, clients that are expecting 2009 talent and 2009 bill rates and expect to operate at a 2009 pace, and none of those things work in today's labor market. But you know, we can't just blame them. We have to educate on that. You talked about that earlier in the program. So we're seeing people start to really invest. One of the things that we're doing a lot of right now is more ongoing transactional surveys where we're identifying contractor issues, hopefully when there's smoke instead of fire, and we've seen the adoption of that far exceeded what we thought it would be, which I think is just another sign that people are really focused on retention and they're really focused on rehire. and that seems to be sort of the play of the day right now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So we have a few more questions for our panel. Just a quick reminder that if you want to ask questions, there is a Q&A button, and on the right-hand side is where you can type in and ask your question if you would like. Otherwise, we will keep going here, and I'm going to move on to training. And Tom, I'm going to ask you this question first, and then move on to you, Pam, to talk about training as well. So when you look at investments, and especially in results from the survey that we did, training doesn't rank high in terms of investments. Yet, ironically, sales and recruiting productivity often ranks low and often suffers from lack of training. So maybe they're trained when they first start, but there really isn't an ongoing training program for them. So, Tom, what do you believe? What's the most important internal training program that staffing firms should implement and should invest in and really pay close attention to?
Well, a couple of things. One, I'm definitely seeing a trend over the last few years. It used to be that if only if you were a large company, let's say over $100 million, you would invest in a full-time trainer, or you would invest in training curriculum, and you'd hire people with no experience and train them yourself. It's getting the bar is much lower now. I'm seeing companies that are much smaller than $100 million that say, I am so sick of hiring industry retreads that aren't working out. I'm going to go for no experience, hire for aptitude and attitude, and train for skills. So I'm seeing investments. It's tough if you're a $20 million company to invest in a full-time trainer, and I'm not seeing a lot of that as much as what are some of the tools. It could be TechServe certification. It can be using Barb Bruno. It can be using other sales or technology training tools. The other thing, which is perhaps a little subtle, but I see it a lot in my own work, is train managers on how they need to coach and motivate and develop their people underneath them. It's not a given that just because someone used to be a great world-class salesperson, they're all of a sudden going to be a great sales manager. You need to bring people on that have the right attitude. I need to learn how to get the best out of people. I need how to be a positive motivator. I need to learn how to coach. So some of the investments that I think are very appropriate would be, how are you training your frontline managers on how to motivate, develop, hold people accountable, lead? So leadership, coaching, development, and that, I think that's an ongoing thing. There's not just a one spot in time. By the way, I also think that there's classroom training, which is great, and some of that has very applicable take back to work value. But there's ongoing training which happens with basically sales and recruiting managers, managed by walking around, coach and motivate by walking around. And frankly, I don't think enough of that is happening.
Right, I would agree. I've heard that recently. The coaching component is so critical to just day-to-day training, and I think in our industry, it's just so common that people move up the ranks from recruiter to sales to management. You hit such an obvious yet so important point, that management training. You really don't hear about that a lot in companies that they're taking the time to do that. It just seems like a natural progression to promote someone, but they may not even be the right person for the role, but that just happens to be the career path. So arming them with the right tools is great. That's a really good point. So Pam, on to you with MDI. What's most important to you when it comes to training? I know it's something that you're personally very passionate about. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yes, I definitely am. I think there's a couple points to be made. One is, there are so many different learning styles, and I think we need to recognize that first and foremost. So while one person might really value an in-person or a classroom setting, another really might learn better from a video or a handout or maybe some shadowing. So I think it's important to have a good variety of training to really reach all the different types of learners that are out there. I think we're seeing that more with millennials as well. The style of training is important, and then the variety of training. As well as follow-up, whether it's activities or shadowing or things like that, to ensure and reinforce what you're training on. When I really look at what's important for us right now, I think one of the big ones is, with all the tools out there, you have to make sure, if you are going to measure that ROI, which we should be, ease of use is a big part of that. So you have to make sure that they are comfortable with the tool, that they're utilizing it well, because if they're just putting it on the shelf and not using it, then, I mean, what's your ROI going to be there? So that's a big one. You know, and when you're spending that much money, I mean, that's a big critical piece. So.
Right, that's a good point. All right, so we're going to move on to final thoughts now. So a brief statement from each of our three panelists. So we're going to start with you, Tom. In preparing for 2016, what are 2 critical things you'd advise staffing execs to remember to help them succeed?
Boy, I can only limit it to 2. One of them we've talked a bit about, and that is for internal hiring, do a formal people pipeline. You should always be recruiting for talent. I like what Pam said a little while ago around you know, networking, and just because you have a cup of coffee with somebody that might be a salesperson or a recruiter down the street doesn't mean you're going to ask them in for an interview. But the number one reason why people become available is because the company's got bought or their compensation plans have changed. So have a people pipeline. Sometimes you're going to have somebody in there that could be in there for years, but that's how you keep the talent coming in, and it puts you in a position of strength. When people aren't working out and you say, I've got to let them go, you've got someone to replace them with. Or as you're growing, you've got other people. I suppose the second thing, if I can only pick 2, is really just drive your producers, establish performance standards based on tenure, how long they've been in the company, and establish that right from the get-go. Here's what I'm expecting you to do, minimum. Here's what I'm expecting you to do if you're on pace, and reward them when they do that, and hold them accountable. Don't hang on to talent that month after month after month is below your minimum standards. We're just notorious for doing that. So get better at people pipelining, so you've got alternatives, and get better at coaching, training, developing people, and holding them accountable to production standards.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. So Pam, now on to you. So just to repeat the question, in preparing for 2016, what are 2 critical things you'd advise staffing execs to remember to help them succeed?
Sure. Well, I would definitely echo what Tom said around hiring. So your talent is crucial. I mean, when we look at, you know, our salespeople really are our biggest marketers, right? So ensuring that you have the right people in those positions is really critical. So I think going back to your hiring process, you know, making sure that you have a thorough hiring process so that you can vet talent well, making sure your managers are trained on that process as well is important, and then setting them up for success with training. And then I think the big key one is just monitoring, you know, are they on track, having those new hire expectations, and then coaching. So if they are off track, it's, you know, maybe not pull the plug in a month or 2, but, you know, okay, let's coach. You know, we also hired this person because we felt like they were coachable too. So that's probably the first one. The second one is new business development takes time. You know, you really have to take a step back and understand that you may not be able to break into a new account in 30 days. So if you've got some hunters out there, you really have to take a look at activity as well. And Tom mentioned also really setting those expectations. So, you know, if they haven't broken into that account yet, looking at the activity, adjusting often. You know, why aren't they hitting that activity, and making sure you are communicating what your expectations are very clearly. But when it comes to new business development, really focusing on that. And then I think around both of those points, culture is really important. So each of those things has to match your culture. So, you know, what you took from one company in a sales-focused capacity might not match where you are right now. So just remembering that from a hiring and a new business development perspective.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. And Eric, we're going to have you close out the Q&A part here. So in preparing for 2016, what are 2 critical things you'd advise staffing execs to remember to help them succeed?
I think the first one that jumps up, and Pam hit on this a little bit, but certainly in the new business development range of things, we would encourage people to educate, get credit for the value that you add, and the way to do that is utilizing data as part of the sales process. We found that potential hiring managers or clients were 22% more likely to take a meeting with you if you could share some kind of data with them, salary data, hiring trends, things along those lines. So go in armed to educate and understand that it's not going to happen overnight, to Pam's point. When you get into the talent side of the equation, the big thing, and I've kind of talked about it a lot here, is don't discount what you already have. You work so hard to get talent, to vet talent, to get them placed. Don't forget about them once they're placed. When we run our businesses well, there's an annuity component to that business, yet we tend to only focus on the next deal and not really safeguarding the deals that we have in place and the talent that we already have on assignments. So pay attention to who you have there, not just those that are on the assignment, but as they come off assignment, and to Tom's point really early in this discussion, look at your database, mine your database, get really, really good at looking internally before you look externally. Because when you look externally, you're starting from scratch again. You've got to go through the complete vetting, you've got to go through the complete background work, and you're not as persuasive when you try to market that candidate to one of your clients.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Found the session valuable in the video format with the Google Hangout, a refreshing change to standard webinars. So please keep an eye out for a link to the recording. We'll be sending that out after the Hangout here today. And as always, just please feel free to reach out with any questions. A special thank you to Leah McElvey with the ClearEdge team for her help pulling this together and producing the survey that hopefully you all have a copy of. And if not, just make a simple request and we'll be sure to get that in your hands. And of course, a huge thank you. We really appreciate it, Tom, Pam, and Eric, for you all joining us today via video and taking this time to be with us. So with that, we wish everyone a happy new year and much success going into 2016. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.